My favorite moment of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein happens so quickly that it's really quite easy to miss. In chapter 12, Victor Frankenstein's creation sees itself for the first time, in the reflection of a transparent pool. At first, he can't believe that this is his reflection at all. Once he eventually accepts this grim visage as his own, he is, quote, filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. This is the moment when the creature learns that the world will see him before it hears him. No matter the effort he puts into learning empathy, into being a functional member of the world, he will forever be judged on the basis of his appearance. He is not bitter because of what he is, per se. It's more accurate to say that he is bitter because of what he will always be in the eyes of the rest of the world. This is a being who, unlike most, learned language before learning belonging, who can only understand his identity through stolen observations, and who was thrust into a world that was never going to give him a chance. Almost a century after Frankenstein was written, Franz Kafka opened his book The Metamorphosis with an act so abrupt, so absurd, that it almost feels like a joke told too seriously. One morning, when Gregor Samsa woke from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed into a horrible vermin. There is no reason given for this transformation, no logical progression of events or characters with an answer are provided to the reader. Kafka denies us the comfort of explanation. And yet, despite Gregor Samsa's awful transformation, he does not scream, nor does he bother to ask why this has happened to him. Instead, he worries about missing work. This is where the first roots of identity horror really start to take shape, because the terror doesn't necessarily stem from the fact that Gregor has changed, it comes from the fact that he hasn't changed enough. He still thinks like himself, still measures his worth by productivity, though his body has undergone a metamorphosis. His sense of responsibility and obligation to his family are intact and unchanged. Thus, the underlying horror in Kafka's Metamorphosis is not the insect shell, but instead the continuity of identity trapped inside a form that can no longer support it. Between Frankenstein's monster and Gregor Samsa exists a shared wound, the realization that identity is not self-defined, at least not in a societal sense. It is instead something that is granted conditionally, something that is agreed upon by multiple parties and that can be retracted in turn. Nobody recognizes the humanity buried within Frankenstein's monster. Gregor's family refuses to acknowledge his transformation, going so far as to lock him in a room and kill him to avoid confronting their suspicions as to his new identity. These stories set the stage for the identity horror found in the stories discussed in this video, which explore a very natural continuation of that same idea. What if your identity was entirely irrelevant? What if something came along that could perfectly imitate everything that makes you the person you are? At what point in this process does our concept of identity break down entirely? When I first played developer Trioscaz's 2025 indie horror game No, I'm Not a Human, the premise seemed fairly straightforward. The sun is making the world too hot to be inhabitable. The only safe time to be outside is at night. But at night, creatures called visitors lurk. These visitors are capable of perfectly imitating human speech, behaviors, and mannerisms, at least for the most part. You play as somebody with a house. This makes you a key shelter from the wrath of the sun. People will come to your door, but visitors will too. It's up to you to try and distinguish those who are human from those who are not. Should you let a visitor in, they will kill the people you let in one by one, day after day, until you are the only one left to prey upon. This should, in theory, be a simple task. There are signs you can look out for that indicate the presence of a visitor. Perfect teeth, dirty fingernails, hairless armpits, etc. The issue I ran into is that everyone I talked to at the door was so convincing. Thanks in large part to the exceptional writing of No, I'm Not a Human, every character I talked to felt fleshed out, felt real. How could I turn any of them away? The first two people to come to my door were an exceptionally tall man and a very anxious woman. The man had been kicked out of the bar he was taking shelter in for causing a disturbance. I figured surely the game wouldn't throw a visitor at me right away, and so I let him in. The woman, meanwhile, apologized profusely for disturbing me and explained that she had been fired and kicked out of her home. She expressed how scared she was at the state of things. Knowing that, I couldn't possibly turn her away. The next morning, I decided to test my new arrivals. I went to talk to the anxious woman who went into detail about being kicked out of her home. Her roommate was found dead, or killed, by a group of strange men that did something to her. The woman broke down before she was able to tell me what exactly transpired. I decided to hold off on testing her and went to speak to the tall man. He told me he was kicked out of the bar for screaming, "Stop blaming everything but yourselves," at the other people taking shelter, a fairly reasonable exclamation to make, given the circumstances. Of the two of them, the anxious woman was by far more compelling and believable, but the tall man was quite reasonable as well, so I hoped and prayed that they were both human. Regardless, it was time to test them. I went back to the anxious woman and told her I had to check her teeth. She seemed taken aback, saying, "You're going to make a decision based on my teeth?" She then explained that she just had her teeth fixed, though she couldn't recall going to the dentist. She opened her mouth, and I examined her with a sinking feeling. Her teeth were perfect. I was now presented with a choice. I wanted to believe this woman, wanted to trust that she was who she claimed. I felt for her, understood the harsh circumstances she was navigating. At the same time, she had the only significant feature of a visitor that I was aware of at this point in my playthrough, and that could not be overlooked. I decided I had to push further, and so I pulled out my gun. She was distraught, of course, and couldn't believe that after all her bad luck, this was going to be how it ended. I couldn't take any chances. I chose to shoot her. After this choice was made, she seemingly accepted that this was the end. In a sequence of text that was difficult to get through, she confessed that she was scared of dying. She asked me to cover her eyes so she wouldn't see it coming. This interaction was so uniquely human that I was second-guessing myself heavily by now. Her last words before the gun fired were, "Let me have just a little longer," and then the screen faded to black. She was a visitor. To me, the core takeaway from "No, I'm not a human" is that identity is largely a construct. You play as the arbiter of who is human and who is not, and that line is as thin as somebody who hasn't had a chance to brush their teeth in days or who is unable to sleep, both very realistic scenarios in the apocalyptic presentation the game sets forth. Consider this from the perspective of a person who takes shelter in the player's house. Whether you're a human or not, alive or dead, could depend solely on something as mundane as whether or not you shave your armpits. One questionable presentation of a minuscule part of yourself, and you're likely dead, your humanity ultimately rejected by somebody whose own humanity cannot be definitively proven. See, the player can check themselves as well, and depending on the actions you take, you might just show some signs of being a visitor. Whether or not the player actually is a visitor very much depends on how you choose to interpret the narrative and themes of the game. But the fact remains the distinction between visitor and human is seemingly very arbitrary, no matter what tests are run. What happens then when we are forced to accept the futility of such tests? John Carpenter's The Thing takes place at the edge of the world, or at least as close as you can get. The film follows a group of men working at an Antarctic research base, which is entirely isolated from the rest of the world. After the titular Thing is introduced, a monster that can shapeshift to imitate other people, the men have to work together to survive, but cooperation comes with great risk. See, whereas nobody really knows where the visitors in No, I'm Not a Human came from, or how they mimic people so well, the Thing's mode of attack is all too clear. Where the visitors stalk their victims like predators, the Thing instead assimilates. It becomes. It does not wear faces like masks, it reconstructs them at a cellular level. And when it speaks, it's not improvising. It's remembering. This is the great cruelty of the film, in my opinion. The creature does not merely imitate behavior, it also inherits the memories of those it kills. Childhood stories, professional expertise, emotional history, all of it becomes a means for the Thing to get close to the people you were once close to yourself. Memory, the very thing we have to cling to as proof of self, becomes a liability. After all, if something remembers your life just as well as you do, memory cannot possibly serve as identity. It becomes nothing more than information. As the film progresses, the men desperately search for tests to prove their humanity. Extensive questioning, blood work, even threats of execution. Nothing's off the table in the search for a clear boundary between the self and the other. But the movie is unforgiving in its underlying implication. Any boundary you draw can be crossed. At a certain point, the question, "Are you still you?" becomes unanswerable. Worse still, it becomes dangerous. To insist on certainty is to risk killing the wrong person. To refuse certainty is to risk being replaced. The horror of the thing is not that someone might be an imposter wearing your friend's face, it's that there might not be a meaningful difference. By the final scene, the film gives up on a resolution entirely. The two remaining survivors, Childs and Macready, sit in the cold, each unsure if the other is human. They do not test each other, though. They simply wait. This is a devastating choice because it suggests something almost unbearable. The idea that identity is, after a certain point, utterly unprovable. Either one of them could be the thing, and the other would have no way of knowing. And yes, I'm aware there are plenty of fan theories discussing the ending, but the director, John Carpenter, has said that the ending is intentionally left vague, so these theories are obviously not worth discussing for the sake of this video. The thing ultimately suggests that if there exists a perfect copy of everything that makes you who you are, then the very concept of you as a person becomes optional, in a sense. If nobody can tell the difference between the you that you were and the you that something else became, what point is there in drawing a distinction between the two? Even worse to consider, though, is this. What if exactly one person could tell the difference? The Magnus Archive is a horror podcast created by Jonathan Sims and distributed by Rusty Quill. It follows a man who is also named Jonathan Sims, though he goes by John, who works at the Magnus Institute as the head archivist. The Magnus Institute collects statements from people who have had encounters with the supernatural. This could mean anything from doors that should not be there, to living mannequins, to someone who thinks they saw a ghost on their way to work. The Magnus Institute hoards it all. John's job, then, is to sort these statements and file them away, something that his predecessor notably did not do. While there is a larger, overarching plot that I would love to discuss, and that I highly encourage you to discover for yourself by listening to the podcast, I want to focus on one creature from the show in particular for the purposes of this video: the Not Them. In many ways, the Not Them is similar to the Visitors and the Thing. Like the Thing, it stalks its victim for a time, then gets rid of them and assumes their identity. Like the Visitors, it captures all the key components of what it is to be human: speech, behaviors, mannerisms, all perfectly adapted once it replaces its victim. But there is one very important way in which the Not Them is different. See, where the Visitors and the Thing both work to the best of their ability to appear functionally identical to that which they seek to imitate, the Not Them doesn't need to bother. Instead, it takes on a different appearance entirely, and simply rewrites the memories of everybody that knew its victim, convincing them that this is simply how they always looked. This is horrifying enough to consider, of course. How could you possibly tell if the people you know, the people you love, are in fact who they say they are in this scenario? Were this the extent of the horror, the Not Them would undoubtedly still be in this video, but it wouldn't be the final topic of discussion. The thing is, I haven't been entirely honest with you. The Not Them does rewrite the memories of people who knew its victim, it's true. But it's not quite accurate to say that it rewrites everyone's memories. It picks exactly one person, one individual who is at least somewhat close to the victim, and does the worst thing imaginable to them. It leaves their memory untouched. This might seem like a mercy at first, but it is in fact the cruelest possible scenario. This one person knows that the Not Them is, well, not them. But nobody else believes this. Everyone ridicules the person, asks kindly if they're feeling alright, reassures them that their loved one is exactly the same as they always were. But they know better. The fear and terror that come with this emotional solitude is what the Not Them feeds on, and thus there are actually two victims of the Not Them. The one who is replaced, and the one who remembers. The Not Them is identity horror in its purest form. There's no violent transformation, no blood and guts, nothing but the psychological impact of its subtle replacement. Every reminder of the person that was replaced is itself replaced. Childhood photos and home videos instantaneously edited to include this new person, a way to reassure everyone that yes, this person always looked this way, sounded this way, acted this way. Only the one who remembers protests, and it is at this point we have to confront something quite troubling. Does it even matter if the victim is remembered by just one person? Does the memory of a single individual encounter an overwhelming amount of evidence that says they're wrong? Of course, we as the audience know that the one who remembers is correct, but in an objective sense, any sane person would side with the majority in this scenario. And as much as I would love to say that, yes, one's memory is all that ultimately matters when it comes to preserving humanity and identity, I cannot. Memory is reconstructive, not recollective. Every time we recall a memory, we are essentially rebuilding it from scratch. As such, we're prone to get little details wrong each time we recollect, and as we recall again and again, these little details stack up. The end result of this process may well be a memory that is almost unrecognizable when placed side by side with the event it was born from. Memory is fundamentally unreliable. This is why eyewitness testimony is a leading cause of wrongful conviction in the United States. We like to think that our memory is far more infallible than it actually is. The not them exploits this unreliability to prey on both the person it replaces and the person it curses with the burden of remembering correctly. Taken together, these stories suggest that identity is not a fixed object we carry with us, but a fragile process that only exists so long as it is recognized, repeated, and believed. Frankenstein's monster learns that who he is will always be overwritten by how he is seen. Gregor Samsa learns that even a complete inner self is meaningless once the world can no longer accommodate it. No, I'm not a human reduces humanity to a series of surface-level checks. The thing renders individuality obsolete through perfect replication. The not them completes this spiral by revealing how easily identity collapses once memory itself begins to rot. What these works ultimately ask us to confront is not simply the fear of being replaced, but the far quieter terror of being rendered unnecessary, of discovering that who we are can be disproven, duplicated, or forgotten without resistance. Identity horror lingers because it exposes something deeply uncomfortable. That you, as a person, are not guaranteed by memory, body, or even continuity, but by an ongoing, fragile agreement with the world around you. And agreements, as these stories remind us, can always be broken.